Galaxy's Edge, A Crush of Fate by Zoraida Cordova is the young adult novel tie-in to the Galaxy's Edge multimedia project and was released on the same day as Myths and Fables. I really enjoyed most of this book, but there are a few really grating things that pissed me off, but I'll talk about the things I liked and the story first. The premise of the book is two children, Izzy and Jules, were best friends on Batuu, and then one day Izzy's family packs up and leaves Batuu forever. Then about 13 years later, Izzy is on a job delivering a package and the destination happens to be Batuu, and the very shop Jules works at. It's a good setup and I did enjoy the overall book, and it was very enjoyable to see Izzy and Jules getting reacquainted with each other. Izzy's parents died and she joined a crew of outlaws and they end up ditching her, which is why she took on this job, and when she meets Jules for the first time, it's quite funny because she accidentally punches him in the face when she was absent-mindedly banging on a door, and he opens it and gets a fist right in his schnoz. It takes them a few seconds, but they recognise each other after more than a decade, and he guides her around town. At some point they accidentally switch suitcases, which led to a different part of the story where after spending the day together, Izzy had to track Jules down to get the case back, but I wasn't keen on the premise. The old switch suitcases thing was old in the 90s, and in such a big galaxy, what are the chances that they have identical cases? Pretty slim if you ask me. Not impossible, but astronomical. Eventually, Izzy's old crew comes to Batuu on their own mission, and when it's revealed that they were there to either force a farmer to sell their land to a corporation or raze it to the ground, I thought it was well set up because throughout the book we hear about how Anatolla, the leader of the band of outlaws, is one of the best mercenaries in the galaxy. She gets things done and it doesn't matter what it is. People die because of her, things are destroyed because of her, and that's exactly what she's doing on Batuu, so I thought it was well set up. Of course, Izzy and Jules, along with help from some of the Black Spire locals we meet throughout the book, manage to stop Anatolla and her team, and it ends on a high note. It's not the deepest story in the world, but I really did enjoy it. I thought it was paced very quickly, no character was boring or overused, the characters are very believable, and some of the interactions between the characters is some of the most realistic I've read in the new canon. They talk like normal people, not like people saying things in a Star Wars way. Sure, they have sayings like "Spires protect you" and another one about bright suns or something, but that's to be expected. But I mean, the actual dialogue and interactions between two characters who are just talking normally feels normal. Of all the people they could have brought into this book, they picked the one I never would have guessed. Hondo Ohnaka plays a part in this book, although he never actually makes an appearance. Apparently he's gone legit and started up an above-board trading company, and although he's off-world for the entire story, I think it's a good link to the rest of the Star Wars universe. Now, I'm reading Black Spire at the moment, which is the adult novel for this project, and some of the characters from this book are in that, and I'll talk more about it when I review Black Spire, but it's so nice to have characters in one book pop up in another book, because I can say, hey, that's Alju, she was in Crush of Fate, she fixes the ships that come in, or hey, that's Ogar, she was the crime boss in the last book. I've said for years that the novels feel like disconnected, isolated stories because they don't connect in any meaningful way. It's nice to finally see some overlap between the books, because it makes it feel like one big universe, and this is definitely a step in the right direction. There's also things like the Surabat River Valley, which I talked about in Myths and Fables, and all three of these books have similar characters or places, so it works. I like that they did this. Speaking of Black Spire, that book, just like this one, is set mostly after The Last Jedi, so we're seeing stuff leading up to the rise of Skywalker, and in Black Spire, Vi Moradi and Cardinal from the Phasma book travel to Batuu to start recruiting and rebuilding the Resistance after its decimation in the previous two movies. At one point in Crash of Fate, when Izzy and Jules finally deliver the package, it turns out to be some Resistance members hiding out in some caves, and one of them is described as a woman who, and I quote, had dark brown skin and tight curly hair kept short, which sounds a lot like Vi Moradi to me, so I'm curious to see in Black Spire if we'll see this interaction from Vi's point of view. The end of the book involves the Resistance coming out of hiding on Batuu and attacking the First Order, although we never actually get to see what happens, it's just the final thing. So I wonder if this book takes place just after the events of Black Spire, since that's where Vi builds the Resistance on Batuu, and if it leads right into Rise of Skywalker. I've been an advocate of people not getting excited and reading too much into things, but given how these two books intertwine, I'm wondering if something has changed on the creative side, and this really does lead up to 9 the way it should, or if this is just the equivalent of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the MCU, a sideshow that once had the potential to affect the core movies, but was wasted and swept aside. Something I noticed is that they call Galaxy's Edge a multimedia project, and it is, but it's no different from the movies, except that this time, instead of a movie, it's a theme park. For example, each movie gets at least one children's book, one young adult novel, and one adult novel, a comic, and the movie itself. And this is no different. We had Myths and Fables as the children's book, Crash of Fate as the young adult novel, Black Spire as the adult novel, and there's a Galaxy's Edge comic, and the trade for that is released in November. So it's no different from the movie, except it's a theme park, so I don't know why they've called it a multimedia project, but they don't do the same with movies. That's nothing to do with the book though, just an observation I made. The final thing I want to note is that something that stood out to me, and it was such a tiny little detail, but they had drinks with funny in-universe names like Fuzzy Tauntaun and Bespin Fizz, and I really liked that because it made the world seem a bit more real. It's okay to have funny names for drinks. I remember when the only piece of lore connecting the new canon used to be Tonneray wine, as if it was the only drink in the galaxy, despite it being rare, since it comes from Alderaan, which had been destroyed. So having names like this for drinks, I can't explain it, but I liked it, it worked. So yeah, there's plenty to like about this book, and I really enjoyed it. It's not all roses though, and as I said, there's a fair few things I take issue with. Something I didn't like was the amount of, I don't know what to call it, lusting, for want of a better word, in this book. I get it's a young adult novel, and somehow that translates to horny teenagers every time, but there are better ways to do it. Lost Stars is an excellent example of this. In that book, we had two characters who grew up together, joined the Empire together, and were torn apart by their morals. One refused to continue service in the Empire because of the atrocities they committed, and the other refused to leave because no matter how bad the Empire is, they made a promise to serve them, and a promise shouldn't be broken. So we have characters who are equally morally just, but that end up on opposing sides in a war, similar to West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet, or even any Greek tragedy. The drive of Lost Stars wasn't the lust between the characters, it was the love they couldn't share because they put their morals above their own lust. Izzy and Jules are on a backwater planet, so they don't have the same kind of dilemma as Thane and Sienna did in Lost Stars, so I wouldn't expect their relationship to be as heavy as the one in Lost Stars, and that's okay, but the problem I have is every other page, they both seem to be trying really hard not to jerk off. I'm not even joking, I wish I was, and this is why I used the word lust instead of infatuation. And then we get to the lore. Lore? What fucking lore? There are so many fucking issues with lore in this book, it's unbelievable, and it's not minor stuff either, it's canon-breaking stuff. Remember how there was no New Republic fleet in The Force Awakens, so they had to explain in the shitty Aftermath trilogy that Mon Mothma had demilitarized the New Republic? Yeah, no, not anymore apparently. These days, on Batuu of all places, lots of people grow up to join the New Republic Defense Fleet. I'm sorry, the fucking what? The thing that didn't exist until this book was released and is the very reason the Resistance was on its own in both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. That New Republic Defense Fleet? Oh, let's not forget Kaz from fucking Resistance. He was apparently in the New Republic Navy. What fucking New Republic Navy? Where is... What's happening? I don't understand what's happening. There's a New Republic Defense Fleet, a New Republic Navy. Where the fuck were they in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi? And why would so many people from Batuu be joining this non-existent fleet anyway? This book is set after The Last Jedi, but Jules and Izzy were born about halfway between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, an era where it's explicitly stated in multiple pieces of media that there is no Republic fleet. That's not my opinion, that's in black and white in multiple books and comics, and I'm aware that I sound like Freddy, but unlike Freddie Prinze Cockhead, I actually have evidence on my side. It's printed in millions of books around the world. And I thought Batuu was at the edge of the unknown regions, disconnected from the rest of the galaxy in general, so why would so many people from Batuu be joining this defense fleet? It makes no fucking sense. And hey, remember how leading up to The Last Jedi, lots of books, even the source books, made it crystal clear that very few people in the galaxy can read and write on paper? I vividly remember it being mentioned in both Bloodline and Inferno Squad, as well as in The Last Jedi Visual Dictionary. All books released after The Force Awakens but before The Last Jedi. The whole reason for pushing this tidbit? So that fuckface Johnson could put a quill and ink in Kylo Ren's room when he was training with Luke, and this one little fact alone drove people to think that the person who sent Leia a handwritten note and saved her from the napkin bombing in Bloodline was none other than Kylo Ren himself, despite the fact that he had already turned to the dark side. Why then are there so many people able to read and write on Batuu? Jules can read and write, his boss can read and write, and if they can, Lord knows how many others can. And this isn't the first time I've pointed this out, there's lots of other books and comics where everybody can just read and write. This is just stupid. I've never liked the idea that people can't read and write in Star Wars. That's a stupid addition from Disney. If they can't read and write, then what's with all the advertisements in Arabesh? What's with R2's readout on Luke's X-Wing? It was a bad idea from the beginning, but it's one that's made it into canon, and they can't just change that willy-nilly, because if they do, it changes everything we've read about before. If lots of people can read and write, then any time it's been brought up in the novels so far that it's a rare thing is just completely wrong and invalidates lots of things. The most obvious one that comes to mind is the idea that it was Kylo Ren warning Leia about the napkin bombing. This is why Disney, Hidalgo, the story group, all of them are simply no good at their fucking jobs. They release things that can seriously damage anything that came before, and it's the kind of thing that when I read it, it makes me go, well, then why was that such a big issue in the fucking book, comic, film, whatever? There's a statue of the Jedi in the outpost, and people seem to know it's a Jedi, but I thought the galaxy had been banned from talking about them under Imperial rule, which was such an effective tactic that even after their defeat, Rey wasn't even sure they were real. But now everybody knows what a Jedi is, even though the only time a Jedi has been seen since Return of the Jedi was Luke on Crate, and there were hardly any spectators there, not to mention the fact that the First Order is on Batuu, and they seem to have just left the statue where it is instead of tearing down what was supposed to be a symbol of hope in The Last Jedi. The trade on Batuu is a fucking joke as well. These people live at a trading outpost where people from many different systems come to trade, apparently. What currency do they accept? Only their own Batuuan currency, Spira. Yes, Spira, as in the land of Final Fantasy X. I half think that's a coincidence because it's the Black Spire outpost, so Spire turns into Spira here, but it's still a hell of a coincidence. And what kind of trading outpost is that anyway? Anyone who wants to buy any items or service has to go and convert their currency like it's a fucking airport or something? It's ridiculous. I don't believe a trading outpost would work like that in Star Wars. Sure, there was Watto and Qui-Gon, but Watto had a small shop on Tatooine, and the currency he used was widely used in the Outer Rim, not just on Tatooine, so it made sense. People only accepting Batuuan currency makes no sense at all, and it's something that should have been omitted. And speaking of the Black Spire outpost itself, wow, this thing has changed since it first appeared in Thrawn Alliances. Either I'm remembering wrong, or in that book the outpost wasn't particularly built up. It had a few houses, a bar, a shop, but it was like a little yokel town in the Wild West. Now it's a massive, sprawling outpost with thousands of people and hundreds of buildings. It seems like someone at Disney read Thrawn Alliances, which I find hard to believe by the way, and said, hey, let's make a theme park out of that, with no consideration at all for the original source material. This only hurts the Galaxy Edge theme park even more because now it's not faithful to the original idea, and shows that Disney have once again done what they've done with Star Wars since they started making their own content. They've poached an idea and tried to make it their own and failed. And I didn't like the way it was presented in this book because it's clearly been changed purely to push the park, not to tell a good story that matches up with pre-existing canon. Disney's own canon, I might add. When the fuck is Hidalgo going to get off his big fat hairy arse and say, hey, I'm inbred, I can't keep the law like I'm supposed to, we need other people to do it. And if there are already other people, why isn't somebody saying to them, do your fucking jobs? Or if they are doing their jobs, and this is most likely in my opinion, why is somebody at Disney saying, yeah, I hear you, it doesn't match up with the law, but I don't care because we can build a park out of it? It's stupid. This is another example of Disney's Tourette's attitude. They just say something and latch onto it without any proper thought whatsoever, and they wonder why people are losing interest in the franchise. Star Wars has always been a well-crafted, interwoven story. Sure, the expanded universe suffered every time George made a movie, but in general, it all fit together nicely. Disney are just spinning a wheel and doing whatever the needle lands on without planning ahead at all, and the franchise is suffering for it. You know what I think? I think Galaxy's Edge in and of itself isn't a bad idea. The problem with it is Disney, as usual, didn't think it through properly, so now we have an overpriced park based on one book, but to make it seem like a place worth going to, they had to retcon it in a load of new books. I mean, seriously, Galaxy's Edge, what's actually there that people want to see? Absolutely fucking nothing. We've all seen those plans for the Star Wars theme park that could have been, and if that was too big, and they only wanted to push their stuff, they could have. They could have used planets and places we've seen in the sequel trilogy, and standalone stories, but instead they went with a place nobody has ever heard of unless they read the books, charge a fortune, then expect it to succeed? Listen, Disney, if I was rich enough to pay the prices you're charging for Galaxy's Edge, I wouldn't be going to it. I'd be in a penthouse at the Ritz drinking champagne, coked up to the eyeballs with a hooker on each arm. It's a fucking joke. Law is a fucking joke to these people. I don't know how they expect anyone to invest in a story that constantly contradicts itself, thereby removing any value in investing time or interest in the subject. How stupid do they think we are? Grammar is all over the fucking place. Words are used when they simply don't fit into a sentence. Here's a quote, just so you have context. It's from the beginning of the book when Izzy goes to Batuu and meets Jules for the first time in more than a decade. She went rigid, straightening her shoulders against the heavy weight she carried, and the silence wound between them. Silence. Not silent, as it should have been. Silence. I've said for years they don't have people proofreading these books, both in terms of law and English, and look, 5 years after they rebooted the franchise, Disney still doesn't see fit to give us books in proper fucking English. My favourite part of the book had to be the acknowledgements. Oh yes, my friends, the acknowledgements. Pablo Hidalgo is a snivelling little worm of a man hiding behind a wall of Twitter followers. He's a troll of the worst kind, incapable of answering a straight question without making the process feel like pulling teeth. I know, I've asked him questions before and he adopts social justice warrior tactics for arguing. Deflect, ask other questions, answer a question similar to the one asked but not the one actually asked, avoid giving straight answers at all costs. But when I argued with him, eventually he answered me. It took a few hours, but I dragged an answer out of him. He categorically denied being responsible for the law in the new canon. He said that if people come to him and ask him questions about the law, he tells them he gets credited for it, but he has no idea why people think he's responsible for law. He seems to want it both ways. He wants to accept all the praise for being in charge of law while also accepting none of the responsibility. And yet, Zoraida Cordova clearly states in her acknowledgements, and I quote, "Thank you to the ultimate keepers of Star Wars knowledge, Story Group executives Matt Martin and Pablo Hidalgo, and copy editor Megan Granger." Huh. Strange that Hidalgo would be credited with being a keeper of the Star Wars knowledge and Story Group executive, which for those of you who don't know means he's in charge of the Story Group and by extension the stories and lore they produce, if he isn't in charge of the lore. Gotcha, Pablo, you fat fuck. It's in black and white in a book you allowed to go to print. Had you been doing your job, you would have noticed that and pulled it so you could still claim innocence, but it's right there in black and white because you don't give a shit. So for all the people who tell me he isn't in charge of the Story Group and isn't in charge of the law, please stop. You're wrong. It's in black and white. Anyway, that's my rant on Hidalgo done for this review. Tune in next week for the exact same one. So overall, I did like A Crash of Fate. I liked the characters, I liked the pacing, I liked the plot. I didn't like how much loss there was, and I still don't see the need for it. I was reading the Thrawn trilogy when I was 10. Why do people who are older than I was then need these kind of books instead of proper novels? They can read, can't they? I just wish they would stop hiding behind tropes and write solid stories, which I admit A Crash of Fate is for the most part, but not completely. I just didn't need the distractions every other page. I would have enjoyed the book a lot more then. And I don't say I enjoyed it lightly either. It's incredibly hard to enjoy a story set in a universe when the lore in said story directly contradicts everything that came before it. It may as well be a what-if story or fanfiction, although I have no doubt the lore would add up in both those scenarios since Hidalgo would have nothing to do with either. So yes, there's some truly canon-breaking material in A Crash of Fate, so I can't in good conscience recommend it, but I will say that I thoroughly enjoyed it and got through it in less than a week. Make of that what you will.